Hi and welcome to this AAR of Ronin, where we played a game based on the Seven Samurai film by Akrira Kurosawa. Most of these buildings and figures are Dean's figures. The other stuff is mine, the terrain, the hedges and the fences and the roads and the rivers. I was playing as the bandits, attacking the village, while Dean took the Seven Samurai and the villager peasants. This is the only second time we played Ronin, and it was an interesting set of rules by Osprey Games. In my first turn, I sent my bandits, my mounted bandits, over the river to try to get into the village, while Dean reorganised his defence down there in the centre, splitting his peasants into several groups with the samurai. The mill owner, who was refusing to move, had to be shifted with one of the samurai who moved in there. Meanwhile, I was gathering my forces, getting them to cross the river, over the bridge and the broken bridges as well. The foot soldiers had stopped at the bridges. They've got various weapons here. Some have got katanas, some have got the handguns, and then we had a few mounted as well. As you can see, this was the game early on, as I was making a two-pronged assault on this village. The idea was to try to kill as many villagers as possible, or break the morale of the opponent. There were some access points that we couldn't get past, like the barricades. I sent forward a unit with the long pointy stick. My handgunners, they brought forth their handguns. I can't remember the names of the Japanese weapons, I'm afraid. But here we have the peasants all moving to their defensive positions. There was one samurai armed with a bow who was taking casualties on my men as they were moving in quite slowly, until the mounted infantry smashed into the peasants on my left flank. There was quite a heavy fight over there. Meanwhile, the foot soldiers were moving in closer against the other peasants on the other side. The bandits, I gathered them together to try to fight. I had a lot smaller force than Dean did. I think about 30 men. I had about 12 or 15. But there was a real heavy scrap here on this left-hand side, and I was the winner because I had mounted commanders in their armour, and their good swordsmanship brought down a lot of these peasants here, which was a nice little victory on my part. So as that was pushing forward, he was trying to plug the gaps on both sides as I was moving in, and we were engaging in some hand-to-hand fighting on the right-hand side. This here could have gone either way. I was outnumbered largely. He had a couple of samurai kicking about in there, but mostly peasants as well, so you really have to choose your opponents. Meanwhile, more peasants and samurai had joined the fight against my mounted troops, but even so, I was still gaining the upper hand here. He had his mobile reserve right in the centre of the village, whilst the villagers were making their way to the main central hut as well. They were there being defended by this very last group of villagers and samurai, and the scrapping on my right flank was getting more and more intense, and I was slowly getting the upper hand, very, very slowly, despite being outnumbered. We were cutting through these peasants like they were butter, basically, which was good on my part. They were taking a lot more hits and casualties. I think at this point I'd probably even killed about 20 of the opponents, to only losing one of mine, I think. The handgunners were helping out by firing into the fray, not doing a great deal of damage though. And even more peasants on that left flank were fighting against my mounted troops, but they were losing heavily. I didn't lose a single figure in any of this fighting. A couple got injured, but that was about as far as it went. The game about halfway through was looking a little bit like this, where we had a lot of fighting on the extreme flanks, but I'd not managed to get into the village itself at this point, but I was certainly making massive gains against his defence line that seemed to be crumbling at this point. We'd already done a morale test for the peasants, and they were on shaky ground. The hand-to-hand fighting on the right-hand side was intense, and I was, as I said, I was actually pushing through at this point. We're really really breaking the back of their defence line. The yellow is a light wound, red is a severe wound, and brown is stunned. For those, if you're looking at the counters we were using there, so you can see how much damage we were inflicting on one another. Rather fighting around the mill, I've soon cleared up. Also, I managed to finish off most of the peasants on the left hand side as well. They were pretty much all dead, so he had to get his last reserves and his last samurai into the fight as well, just to try to block off that line of the village before I was able to get in to kill the villagers themselves, because that was the main goal here. So the last two fights came down to the edges of the village where I definitely had the upper hand. I'd killed one of his samurais. The morale completely collapsed for the villagers and they went into rout, started falling back. It was a great game. We'd like to try it again with different tactics. Very fun use of using Ronin for the Seven Samurai, something a little bit different thematically. It's only meant to be for about 8 figures a side, so I think we'd almost broken it with 30 odd figures for the peasants. But I hope you've enjoyed this very brief after action report. Thanks for watching and please subscribe.